Hello, I'm Dr. J.C. Smith, and today I'd like to talk to you about a very important and sensitive issue that most people are aware of. It's what I call chirophobia, which is the medical prejudice against chiropractors. This is similar to racial prejudice or sexism or anti-Semitism, but it stems from the medical profession. And whereas those other forms of discrimination have diffuse origins, you can trace medical prejudice, chirophobia, back to the American Medical Association, and actually to one man. His name was Morris Fishbein, MD. He was also known as the Medical Mussolini because he was a tyrant who headed the AMA from 1924 to 1949. For 25 years, he was the Adolf Hitler, the Medical Mussolini of medicine, and he had a propaganda campaign to contain and eliminate all other competitors. That's why in America we have basically a medical monopoly, and like any monopoly, they have sole control over the market and they charge outrageous prices. That's the origin of chirophobia as well. What made him most interesting was that at that time the AMA was just another poor trade association. So he was clever enough in 1930 to jump in bed with Big Pharma, tobacco industry. Then he started soliciting money from the tobacco industry, and he even allowed them to have booths at medical convention, to advertise in medical journals, and basically the MDs endorsed smoking tobacco. That's why doctors, for the longest time, you'd see television ads and newspaper ads where doctors are actually smoking cigarettes themselves. If you haven't seen it, Google it. But that came to a screeching halt in 1986 when the public became aware that smoking was not good for you and doctors weren't telling you about it. So they changed policy. So they dumped big tobacco and they brought in big pharma, who of course is the drug companies. But with that money, Morris Fishbein was able to put on an extensive propaganda campaign. They paid journalists to put out anti-chiropractic articles. They bought legislators, which to this day the medical industrial complex is the biggest lobbyist on Capitol Hill. So they're still spreading their disinformation to our leaders in our society, unfortunately, because what has medical spine care led to, particularly? One, the opioid crisis; two, unnecessary injections; and three, this pandemic of unnecessary and failed back surgery. But the tide started to turn after Fishbein left the AMA in 1949. The AMA itself decided to start a committee on quackery in 1962. I outline all this in my book, so if there's any of you who are really keenly interested in this whole development, this is what you need to read. But they formed this committee on quackery, whose goal again was to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession. And they were buying off journalists right and left, including Ann Landers. For those of you old enough to remember, she was the first syndicated columnist. She was actually a part of the whole scheme to defame chiropractors. So, an interesting turn of events occurred. In 1975, the religion of Scientology, you've heard of that. Well, L. Ron Hubbard was the head of Scientology. And he first started, before it became Scientology, it was Dianetics, which was branded a cult psychology by the AMA. It was really more of a science fiction psychology, as he was a science fiction writer before he became the head of the Scientology church. Nonetheless, the AMA banned it, criticized it harshly. Well, that pissed off L. Ron Hubbard. And what he did, he had a department of investigation that infiltrated the AMA's headquarters. And at night, these three Scientologists would pilfer through all the files in AMA headquarters. And they stumbled across this file on the propaganda and political campaign against chiropractors. Those were the smoking gun. That's what we needed, because we knew it was going on. We just had no proof of it. I mean, we had proof in the sense that in the first half of the 20th century, over 12,000 chiropractors were arrested 15,000 times, and 3,300 went to prison for doing what I do every day here. In those days, just talking to someone about health, let alone touching them, was considered the practice of medicine. Well, no, we never did that. We practiced chiropractic. We're just hands-on, manipulation and adjustment of the spinal column. So anyway, with those smoking gun evidence, we, the chiropractic profession, took the AMA to court in 1975. In Chicago, a federal court assembled, and the first witnesses that our attorney, George P. McAndrews, who is from a family of 29 chiropractors, including his father, and his brother Jerry was the president of the Palmer Chiropractic College in Davenport, Iowa. The first thing George did was put the AMA bigwigs in the witness booth. And he said, all right, what do you think of chiropractors? And again, here came the lies. Unscientific, quackery, dangerous, blah, 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 blah. His second question was, okay, prove it. Well, they couldn't prove a damn thing. They were just repeating their own lies over and over and over again. Well, then Mr. McAndrews brought in medical experts as witnesses who were ethical, who worked with chiropractors. They saw the great results they were getting. They were getting people out of hospitals in half the time without drug shots and surgeries. It was so convincing that when the judge finally rendered her verdict, she found in favor of the chiropractic plaintiffs, but she also made some interesting statements here. She did mention the long-term intent to destroy the licensed profession by labeling all chiropractors unscientific cultists. Injury to reputation was assured by the AMA's name-calling practice. Unfortunately, that name-calling practice still exists today. The second thing she said that really shook up the medical world was she said, quote, chiropractic was more effective than the medical profession in treating certain kinds of back injuries. Chiropractors were better trained to deal with musculoskeletal problems than most physicians. That was astounding because no one had ever said that in public court. Now there's numerous articles, research projects that I mentioned in my book that substantiate that. But unfortunately, as I said, the name calling still exists. Just like when the Civil Rights Acts in 1964 were passed, it didn't stop racism. Sexism hasn't stopped. Anti-Semitism, white supremacy groups still exist. So just because we had a court decision who brought all this out to the public, it didn't stop anything. To this day, I hear these remarks all the time. My doctor says. A good example of how dangerous that is, because the alternative to a natural solution to this pandemic of back pain, which is an $85 billion industry, and 80% of Americans will have a severe back attack sometime in their life, instead of referring to us, people who get the best results without drug shots and surgeries, the medics just railroad them into drug shots and surgeries, which is what my second book is about. It's the media war against chiropractors, detailing how all that still continues. What's most interesting is how it gets personal. As a chiropractor, we see people here all the time who've had failed back surgery. And all they needed was an adjustment. What do you say to someone who's 1, 2, or 3, or 4 back surgeries? Now they're in constant pain from the surgeries, and it didn't correct the underlying problem, which is what we do, and then they get better after a few adjustments. Do you think they're mad? They've been ripped off emotionally, physically, abused, and it's amazing what's going on. But nonetheless, it happened to me personally as well. My best friend in elementary and high school, John Baker, big guy, 6'4", basketball player, great golfer. He's an architect, smart guy. Well, after my 50th reunion, which I failed to attend because I'm 3,000 miles away from Southern California, I phoned John, who still lives in our hometown. I said, John, how did it go? And he started telling about the kids who showed up and the ones that didn't. And then he added to me, and said parenthetically at the end of our conversation, he goes, by the way, I'm going in next week for back surgery. I said, John, do you know who you're talking to? Well, he didn't. I sent him information, the guidelines that say do conservative care first, before drug shots and surgeries. But he kept saying to me, but my doctor says I've got a bad disc. My doctor says if I don't have it, I'll get paralyzed. My doctor says if I go to a chiropractor, you'll hurt me. This is what I call the voodoo diagnosis. It's fear-mongering, where they just tell these blatant lies to these people, yet they don't know it. These are gullible patients who are in pain, they want help, and they want to trust the surgeon. That's misplaced, because for the amount of money they're getting, they'll be happy to lie to you more than once. When it doesn't work, let's do it again. So anyway, I couldn't talk John out of it. And he wasn't in acute pain. He had hurt his back 20 years before. He told me failing a tree. He just picked all the lumber up and hurt his back. for 20 years. So that's a chronic condition. He doesn't need immediate surgery. Well, anyway, he had the surgery because my doctor says. That's all I remember him saying. My doctor says repeatedly. Well, the next day after the surgery, I got an email from a mutual friend who said, guess what? John stroked out in recovery and is blind and paralyzed on one side. The next day, I got another email from our mutual friend saying, guess what? John died. And I wrote back to him and said, you know, John would still be alive if he had gone to a chiropractor and he'd be feeling much better. And this happens too often in this country. People don't realize it, but medical spine methods, drug shots and surgeries, well, the adverse effects are 2,500 per 1 million. Now, the adverse effects from chiropractic is 1 in 6 million. So I ask you, who's hurting who? The insurance companies know as well because they pay the claims. Well, a neurosurgeon will pay probably $300,000 a year on malpractice. My neighbor just retired as an OBGYN. He retired when his malpractice got to $60,000 a year. You know what I paid last year? $1,500. In 40 years, I've never been sued. Yet, if you listen to these fear mongers, these MDs, and even people in the media, you think we're hurting people right and left. You think I had a red phone to 911. Another good example of how people are misled was an incident that happened 2-3 years ago. Her name was Katie May. She was a Playboy model. Went out to Hollywood to claim her fortune. Well, she was at a photo shoot where she had her neck extended backwards for a prolonged time, and apparently she tore an artery in her neck. Nothing great, just had pain in the neck. So she self-medicated the first night with hot packs and pain pills. Didn't work. The next day, she went to a local chiropractor she'd never seen before. He adjusted her once or twice, didn't help, because she had a tear. And then she went a week later to the hospital. Well, whatever they did didn't seem to work, because 4 hours later she was dead from a stroke, even though she wasn't showing any signs of a stroke, you know, blurred vision, slurred speech, stuff like that. But guess who got blamed? The chiropractor. I remember when that first happened in another case like 25 years ago. I'd never heard of it. I even phoned my insurance company. I said, have you heard? She goes, no, we've never had a claim for it. That's how infrequent. Like I say, it's 1 in 6 million. But again, if you listen to these fearmongers, and they believe me, they exploit that. So to this day, chirophobia is well embedded. So I warn you, if you go to your local primary care and you say, I got a back attack, and if he doesn't say go see a chiropractor first, you need to run out of his office, because they're going to ply you with drugs, principally opioids, which most people don't realize is medicinal heroin. And it wears off, you get a tolerance, and they found it's no more effective than 2 ibuprofen. What's most effective are chiropractic adjustments, because again, most back pain is joint dysfunction. It requires an adjustment to correct that and restore joint motion. The next thing I want to do is very expensive and temporary injections. I had a patient who recently told me his cost $4,000 for 1 injection in the neck, which are temporary. They can lead to blindness and strokes, but they don't tell them that. And then, of course, when they don't work, and they don't, then they say, oh, you got a bad disc, you have to go see a surgeon. Well, they're finding that bad disc appear in pain-free people. The disc is nothing. It's just a shock absorber, and nothing happens to it until the mechanics of the spine, the joints, in other words, are so badly misaligned or locked up that that's what causes in the first place. That's why when people come in with arthritis, stenosis, failed back surgery, even though they've got all that garbage in their back, we adjust them, restore joint motion, because joints are supposed to move, they feel better. But they still have all that arthritis. They still have the bad disc, the bone spurs, the stenosis, but they're feeling better. By restoring joint motion, anybody will feel better. And most people, if you've never been to a chiropractor, as I tease my patients, it's like having never been to a dentist to learn about toothpaste. You're going to have problems. So, but the big thing is you've got to overcome that fear mongering that these doctors are implanting in people. So if you've heard that, I suggest don't trust that doctor. If you can't trust him about the best solution to your back pain, how can you trust him about anything else? Is he going to railroad you an unnecessary stent in your heart, or bypass, or this or that? I mean, you know, hip transplants, knee transplants. Surgery's out of control in America, and they're making too much money by fear mongering on gullible people. So I encourage you, if you're having a back attack, even if you've had failed back surgery, or you've been told you need a surgery, stop. Come here first. Let us examine you. Bring in your imaging reports, your MRIs or X-rays. We'll give you an honest evaluation, and we'll teach you more about what's really happening, because you're not getting the full story. You're getting a lot of fake news from the medical profession. This has been a war of disinformation from day one, back when Morris Fishbein started in 1924, and it hasn't stopped. You know, that's almost a 100-year war against chiropractors. But we're prevailing. All the research shows what we do works best. We're faster, safer, cheaper, quicker, better. And the information in my book proves it. But you need to become more familiar. I mean, after all, it's your life, your spine, your health. So before you jump into drug shots and surgeries, do yourself a favor. Come and talk to me. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll see you then.